Hello everyone. I see people are still coming in, but maybe I'll get started now. Hello, welcome to dieDAS's third annual Walk and Talk. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Wava Carpenter of Design Miami and Wava Projects, and I've been invited by dieDAS to host this year's 5-part series of conversations, each of which will explore dieDAS's very timely curatorial theme for 2021, which is symbiotic habitats. To kind of set the stage, I'd like to read an excerpt from the curatorial statement written by dieDAS's Artistic Director Maurizio Montalti. Okay, so, quote, "The Anthropocene as created and defined by us, humans, is having a dominant impact on the climate and the ecosystem, as we keep facing major environmental disruptions and challenges, such as the extinction of entire species, the loss of biodiversity, the depletion of natural resources, and the incremental rise of global temperatures." He adds, "As part of this complex condition, one thing is certain. The future isn't about erecting barriers, but rather about learning to come together, understanding our relationship to nature, deciphering its interconnected functioning, and becoming once again a pivotal part of it," unquote. So between today and tomorrow, this Walk and Talk series will present conversations with visionary creatives, each of whom in his or her own way employ design thinking and practices to reformulate the sort of relationship between humans and both the built and natural worlds. So I invite you to follow along on all 5 conversations, and I'll provide more information about the ones coming up later on. But for our conversation right now, which is titled Growing Regenerative Connections, this talk will be divided into 3 parts. So we'll begin with dieDAS founding director, Arne Cornelius Wasmuth, who will share an overview of the dieDAS mission, its foundation and future plans. And then next we will have dieDAS Artistic Director Maurizio Montalti, who will discuss the dieDAS Fellowship Program and this year's theme, again, symbiotic habitats. And then we will get to meet the 2021 dieDAS Fellows, who will also tell you a little bit about their work. And we will have time, I believe, for a few questions at the end from the audience. So if you have questions, feel free to write them into the chat box. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Arne Cornelius Wasmuth is the founding director of the Design Academy Zalek, aka dieDAS, and the president of the Marzuna Foundation. An author and lecturer, he has a career that has spanned television, radio, and film production, as well as the preservation and restoration of historical and protected architecture. So hello, Arne. Thank you so much for being here. Please tell us more about dieDAS and its founding.
Thank you very much, Wava. I'm honored that you're presenting our Walk and Talk this year. It's great to have you on board. And hello to everyone. I would like to take a few minutes to introduce you to the Design Academy Zalek and tell you a little bit about the genesis and history of our exciting mission here in the center of Germany. Let me just share my screen with you. Here we go. Does everyone see that? Yeah, I hope so. So, there we go. So this is the site of the Design Academy Zalek. This is a monument of national importance. All the buildings you see in the foreground are the buildings that constitute our special location. Behind you see a medieval castle. There's actually another one a little bit further down, a very sort of bucolic seeming Germanic landscape, which is also a part of the history and the future of this project. We are, okay, now why can't I navigate? There we go. We are here in the center of Germany. You see Berlin up here, and dieDAS, or the Zaleker Werkstätten, are located pretty much in the center of Germany from north to south, but in the eastern part of the country, looking from west to east, which is a location also in the former German Democratic Republic. The Zalecker Werkstätten, as they are historically called, were built as of 1902 by at the time, here you see another image, by a cultural protagonist and important cultural figure of the late 19th, early 20th century, who is called, here you see an image from the 1920s, who's called Paul Schulze-Naumburg. Paul Schulze-Naumburg is a very complex and controversial figure because he was not only a life reformer or a protagonist of the life reform movement of the late 19th century, he was co-founder of the Deutsche Werkbund, which is the German arts and crafts movement. He founded the Bund für Heimat und Naturschutz, which was an important ecological organization around 1900. He was also a pronounced racist and anti-Semite and a strong supporter of the racial ideology of the National Socialists. Now, this makes the Zalecker Werkstätten what we call uncomfortable monument. Here you see an image of Paul Schulze-Naumburg's study at the beginning of the last century when he came here to Zalek, basically initially to build a home for himself and his family. And very soon he was followed by a large number of supporters and students as well, who used to work with him, and he founded the Zalecker Werkstätten, the Zalek workshops in Zalek in 1904. Here you see an image of Adolf Hitler, who was a frequent visitor to Zalek at the time, and that makes also very clear how complex and difficult the history of this site is, because it was at the time in the 1920s a meeting place for prominent members of the National Socialist Party. Paul Schulze-Naumburg was a declared opponent to modernism. He was an adversary to the Bauhaus. He saw the future or the solutions to the problems created by industrialization in a backward movement back to the early 19th century. He was a very strong proponent of classical architecture and a very sort of Germanic vernacular approach to design and creativity. So when the Bauhaus came about, he was a very strong opponent to their vision of the future and of modernism. In 2018, this here on the right is a German art collector, German-Italian art collector and patron called Egidio Marzona. Egidio Marzona enabled the founding of the Marzona Foundation, which bought the historic site in Zalek. It had been empty since 1995, and decided consciously to repurpose the uncomfortable monument. Here you see an image of the Marzona archive. Egidio Marzona has compiled one of the largest archives of the history of modernism in the world, with about 1.7 million archival pieces. And so he was extremely interested in the complex and controversial history of the Zalecker Werkstätten. Here you see him on site in 2018, just after the building was bought by the foundation, and the future of the building was in formation. So here another image. So the Marzona Foundation has set out to do, in essence, two crucial things here in the Zalecker Werkstätten. One is consciously and progressively approach the history of the site and develop a learning center and a documentation center about the history of the Symbiotic Werkstätten of Paul Schulze-Naumburg, the original founder, of also the sentiments of racism and anti-Semitism in Germany, because we believe that it's very important to acknowledge that history and to ask the relevant questions connected to that. Apart from the Learning Center and the Documentation Center, the main goal of the Marzona Foundation is the establishment of dieDAS, the Design Academy Salig, as a future-facing, forward-looking institution and academy concerned with the relevant questions of our time. The Design Academy Salig, at its core, has a number of aspects that it focuses on, and at the heart lies the dieDAS residency program, or the dieDAS fellowships. So we are very honored that right from the beginning for our fellowship program, we connected with Maurizio Montalti, a extremely visionary and talented designer from Italy living in Amsterdam, whose work focuses essentially on the world of mycelium. You'll be hearing more about that later. Together with Maurizio, already last year, we managed to invite 4 fellows to Salig into the unrestored buildings. Eventually, when the Symbiotic Werkstätten are fully restored, it will offer a residency program to up to 16 emerging talents from the areas of design, architecture, and craft, inviting them here to work on their individual projects in this recluse and on this, I would say, challenging historic site, but also always motivating them to work together on a collective project. Now, in the phase pre-restoration, we are kicking off with a series of smaller or shorter fellowship programs for about 2 weeks. And this year, we were very excited, and you'll be hearing more about this a little bit later, that we invited and encouraged 4 extremely talented fellows from really all across the world to come to Salig and work together on a communal project. Here you see just a few images of the kind of work we do, working with mycelium in this year. The second thing that dieDAS does annually is our walk and talk, our summit, where we invite speakers and thinkers from interdisciplinary areas to Salig. At the moment, due to the pandemic, these events are online, but in 2019, we were very happy that we actually managed to have a kickoff event here on site. And this proved to be a very successful and dynamic moment in the history of the dieDAS development, and also in the recognition of how to actually navigate the historic property. Everyone that came here is extremely interested in the history, sees the relevance of discussing and debating about this collective history, and acknowledging that in the background, looking into the future to develop forward-thinking design solutions that are innovative, that are sustainable, inclusive, and international. So basically setting a tone that is exactly the opposite of the tone that the original owner set at the beginning of the 20th century. Here, just a group picture of this kind of event that will be hopefully again taking place live next year, with lectures and speakers from all across the globe. The second thing, or the third thing dieDAS is set out to do, is an outreach program for the local community, also inviting them in to learn about not only where they are, but about the kind of questions that we are approaching and tackling here, design-related questions, as I mentioned, facing into our collective future. Also, next to the visionary aspects of the of the future. We are inviting people to learn, as I said, about the history. We are very happy that we already have certain digital tools that we can use here to instruct or learn or discover the history of the Zaleka Werkstätten. Apart from that, we are building a dieDAS community, which is a very local and global endeavor. So we are connecting with craftsmen from the region, bringing them together with international designers to develop new design answers out of craft and I would say global talent. We are currently connecting with an initiative in Holland as part of our community outreach that is also very much looking into design in the region, where we are also very much located in a very regional area of Germany. And in the course of our restoration endeavor, we have connected with Danish architect Dorte Mandrup, here the second from left, who is a very renowned architect located in Copenhagen. This is a building that I think she's become very famous for. It's a whale center in Norway. And Dorte Mandrup last year developed a master plan for the restoration of the Zaleka Werkstätten. So we're very honored to have an important international architect that has come here to this very regional location in the center of Germany to think about how a space with the history of the Zaleka Werkstätten should look and feel and function for future generations to develop ideas and creativity here on site. One of her main interventions is this round bridge here you see between the former architects building and the West Terrace. Historically, there was a very more reform architecture like structure connecting these two parts. This has gotten lost over time, and so Dorte Mandrup has decided to replace it with a completely different figure, a round so-called infinity bridge, also symbolizing the beginning of a new era here in Zalek. Here you see it again in its location. In the background here behind the trees, you see another alteration to the historic site that she's including. This is going to be our learning or documentation center located right next to the gatehouse, so that visitors and also tourists, of which there are many in this region, have the opportunity to learn about the history and also the present and future of the historic site. Here a brief plan overview. Her design approach is very much taking into account the layering, the historic layering, and leaving many of the historic surfaces intact, so that users or visitors of the dieDAS Academy can clearly read the historic levels that we encounter here. We're very happy that dieDAS has a very international advisory council, including the likes of Christian Benimana, who is from Mass Design Group in Kigali, Rwanda, Dieter Hoffmann, who is the director of an art school here in the region, Sarah Whiting, the dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Design, famous architect and historian Jean-Louis Omer Arbel from Bocci, who's an architect and entrepreneur in the lighting industry and a very creative supporter of our endeavor, Marisa Yu, the director of Hong Kong Design Trust, and Alexandra Daisy Ginsberg, who is an artist and a designer based in London. So that's a very quick overview over the challenging location we are in and the mission dieDAS has set itself to repurpose this site with a design academy inviting, as I said, talent and knowledge from all over the world to assemble here and develop new ideas for our collective future. There we are. There I am.
Okay, thank you, Arnie. That was really interesting and beautiful location, even though it is quite troubled. So now I have the pleasure to go to the second part of this conversation, where we'll be hearing from designer, researcher, educator, and entrepreneur Maurizio Montalti. Working at the intersection of design and biotech, Maurizio is a recognized pioneer in biomaterials. In addition to serving as dieDAS's inaugural artistic director, he heads up the multidiscipline practice Officina Corpuscoli, and is also co-founder, designer, and R&D director of Mogu, a design innovation company dedicated to high-performance biomaterials. So thank you, Maurizio. It's good to see you again. Please tell us more about the fellowship program.
Thank you so much, Wava, for your kind words and for having us here today. And thanks, Arne, for sharing with us this fundamental introduction, I would say, to the layered historical context hosting dieDAS and to the Academy's values, mission, ongoing developments, and the future plans. So let me share my screen. That maybe would be a good idea. Let me just try to do that. Here we go. All right, so for what concerns this year's thematic framework, which is titled Symbiotic Habitat, what I'd like to do today is to try and conduct you through a short journey to reflect on some of the key notions from which the program stemmed in the first place, as well as together looking at the various working methods and the creative approaches that we employed. And I'll do this actually by means of keywords rather than by going through a visual presentation. And I'd like us all to try and focus on such keywords. Let me see if I can actually skip slides. Here we go. So actually the Symbiotic Habitat Fellowship was born as a natural continuation and let me say an expansion on dieDAS 2020 fellowship program, which was titled Farming Materials Ecologies. And as part of such context, we started to collectively investigate possibilities for turning uncomfortable pasts in responsible futures by seeding ideas, methods that could allow for the creation of locally inclusive ecosystems as key to the creation of regenerative processes and responsible materials for design and architecture. As in fact, to thoroughly reflect about it truly means to be inclusive. To include is today ever more urgently needed, because it is undeniable that we live in a time of separation from fellow humans as well as from nature and from the many agents that participate in its continuous becoming. And we humans are just one agent, one only, within a multitude. And as we know, mankind's activities and rather selfish behaviors are to be seen as the core factors that are found at the origin of contemporary instabilities and most urgent concerns. So we have known this for a while now, and the way we live is not serving neither us nor the planet, because our take, make, use, lose supply chain, cultural approaches have brought our planet to a breaking point. And as a result, we live in this complex time, which demands for great reactivity and adaptability to a set of conditions. And just to name few, we can think about climate crisis, hyper-exploitation and ultimate depletion of finite resources, biodiversity decline, environmental emergencies, social inequities, discrimination, pandemics, and the more the merrier, because we know that unfortunately the list is not ending here. And all such conditions perhaps were priorly unconceivable, or at least they were not entirely understood. And that is why it is so important to decipher the relational and, let me say, transitional qualities of what we call nature. Nature is something continuously morphing through the action of multiple forces, of which culture is just one. And, you know, nature and culture are not two notions that are separated from each other, as many still seem to think, as the idea of nature as culture as two entirely divided notions is fundamentally needed to be surpassed. We know that culture informs nature at any time, and the movement through which culture and nature interrelate at all times takes many different directions and flows that go way beyond the circular. And this is due to the participation of the many agents and of the many forces that inform both domains. So ultimately, nature is our home, nature is our origin, and it is our habitat. And it evolves through active processes of entanglement that we call symbiosis. So symbiosis is nothing else than the very process at the origin of life on Earth, as Lynn Margulis explained us, being it basically nothing else than you could say the capacity of a living agent of interacting and establishing partnerships with others beyond their species to sustain their own life and to continue their legacy through special forms of interaction. So, as we said, nature is in a continuous process of becoming, which means that if we understand and we try to embrace that profound meaning that is rooted in notions such as temporality, transitioning, and ultimately death, then we introduce the opportunities for encountering what regeneration is all about. And therefore, we are given the chance to identify how to move forward. As we know, regeneration is not about mitigating harm, but it is rather about restoring, enriching, nurturing, replenishing, and creating the conditions where ecosystems, economies, and living agents, including us, could flourish and possibly thrive for long. So this means that thinking regeneratively is trying to think as a fungus would do, for nature and as nature. And unfortunately, today, as part of this talk, I do not have enough time to deep dive into an accurate exploration of the fungi kingdom, though it's not by chance that fungi have been one of our closest allies along this wonderful 2 weeks of fellowship program, but not the only one. So during these 2 weeks of life and of active work that we have shared, we attempted to jointly explore complex subjects and to investigate research questions, such as, for instance, to name a few, how can we attempt to rethink and eventually rebuild our relationship to the natural world? And once again, how can we contribute to the relational responsibility that we hold towards the fellow humans and also to the non-humans agents in the same way? Another question that we formulated at the beginning of the fellowship was, how can design and the creative practice at large, how can they be employed as driving forces that can serve ultimately the people and the planet in its greater complexity by tackling that very forces that have contributed to shaping the world that we live in today? And again, how should we deal with all the implications that emerge when actually we embrace and adopt processes that are rooted in what nature is, which is transformation, transience. So how can we let go of some of our strongly established cultural habits? And could design and could the creative practice be actually the motor that could really kick off a systemic change, and this by actually showing which type of opportunities emerge when we adopt as part of our production processes or as part of our developments effectively symbiotic habitats, relational habitats in dialogue with each other. So in order to, well, while attempting, let's say, to tackle such questions together with head mentor Eugenia Morpurgo, we developed a rather tight program. as a well-balanced blend between hands-on activities, field trips, inspiring contributions from multiple international guests, and the related and numerous critical dialogues that stemmed from all such encounters. So all in all, the program revolved around two main domains of investigation that though were conceived as one unity, converging and informing each other as in a continuum. So on one hand, led by Eugenia and by her expertise developed as part of our long-term project, Syntropic Materials, we investigated alternative agroecological models, such as, for instance, regenerative agriculture, agroforestry, to conceive locally situated and thoroughly inclusive ecosystemic perspectives that could allow for novel material design processes and therefore for the creation of truly responsible and ecologically resonant materials and products. At the same time, we engaged in a very hands-on practice, which was rooted in the encounter with living agents as key enablers of ecosystems, fungi at first. So by combining different organic elements, different living materials, so-called, such as willows and mycelium-based composite materials, and by challenging the most established methods for working with processes rooted in biofabrication, to bridge towards the multi-species agency in an open ecosystem, rather than aseptically working with pure cultures, as you usually do in industrial practices or in research laboratories, the fellows worked on intuitively creating a site-specific installation in the form of a hybrid living architecture, literally a symbiotic habitat, or as we like to call it, the creature. So the undefinition of such creature was formally guided by a process of active observation, and it manifested also through the integration of different symbolic aspects. So in time, the interesting thing is that such architecture that I'm not spoiling right now, but that you'll have the chance to witness soon, as soon as the fellows will be given stage, along time, such architecture will grow, it will transform, and it will allow for an active dialogue among the multiple living agents that will participate in this relation. So I am sure that the fellows will be happy to talk about it and to show and to tell you more and show elements about the creative process that brought this piece to existence. But what I can say and what I find extremely important is that by letting go of pre-established plans, so by allowing ourselves to be released from any typical form of control and ruthless domestication, and by rooting ourselves in a collaborative process driven by the desire of generating collective encounters, I feel that we gathered together the opportunity of experiencing what designing for and with human and non-human others entails. So let me conclude that this short intervention with a very warm thank you, as I do feel extremely, extremely grateful for having had the chance to contribute once again to the evolution of dieDAS as part of its very own becoming. And I believe that we have been absolutely privileged to be able to welcome and yet again to encounter such incredible group of fellows who are Poliana Moss, Zeno Franchini, Carolina Pacheco, and Daniel Tisch, which apparently is not appearing here because there's been a typo. I'm really sorry about that. In any case, they all come from very many different geographical areas around the globe. They hold different professional and cultural backgrounds. And they also, through their work, investigate different topical focuses that nevertheless appeared to be thoroughly linked with one another. And it is because of them, it is because of their passion, it is because of their skills, their overall commitment, and ultimately, thanks to their great generosity, that this fellowship proved so valuable. This gave us all the chance to embark in an explorative journey that made us learn and grow together for real. And besides what we already harvested during this past few weeks, we cannot wait to witness all that still will grow and all that still will manifest, both physically and metaphorically, along the near future. So it's with no further hesitation that I would very much like to introduce to you our dieDAS 2021 fellows and pass the mic back to Wava. So the floor is yours, dears. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maurizio. That's so inspiring, what you've been working on. So yes, I would love to introduce the fellows and congratulate them as well. I will do so one at a time and ask a few questions of each. Maybe we have around 5 minutes for each one, but you know, that's not a hard deadline. So I'd like to start with Pollyanna Moss. I don't know if I see you yet, but
hello.
How are
Hi.
you? Where? Oh, there you are. Hi. So tell us a little bit about where you're from and the kind of work that you do or even hope to do.
Well, hi, Wava. Really nice to be here today, and I will start by opening a short presentation, maybe share my screen if it's possible. I'm a bit slow at this, but
No problem.
okay, let's first share the screen. Yes. Is that working?
Yes.
Okay, then I will try to pull this down. Press play. Yeah. Okay, well, my name is Pollyanna Moss. I was born in India and recently graduated from the Design Academy in Eindhoven, where I am now working as a designer. And I have really just started to discover all these amazing elements in the background of this picture that you see here. Of course, there's bigger elements that we identify straight away. And that's also the ones that are the object of my research right now in the project that I'm doing called Landschap. And Landschap is a play on words. It means landscape, but also with sheep. So sheep is schaap in Dutch. And in the Netherlands, you have 5 breeds that I started researching through Dutch shepherds and their relationship with the sheep. And through this project, what I was starting to unpack is a lot of these similar topics of nature and culture and how we work together with nature, not just to preserve natural landscapes, but also to preserve our idea of what nature is. And through these 5 different blankets and 5 different shepherds, I was able to understand a little bit more and try to communicate the story of the shepherds who work very long days with these animals to kind of understand the interconnection. So that's just a little bit about my work and what I'm fascinated with right now. I can go a little bit into what we're doing here and what I've been learning.
Yeah, since you have a presentation, feel free to walk us through. I have any number of questions for you, but yeah, take us through the slides.
Well, I thought I could also respond to some of your questions if you want.
Okay, sure. So sorry, I'm trying to figure out the right one to ask. So I do want to know about your experience with the fellowship, specifically what you were working on and what you feel like your perspective brought to the work that was done as a group.
Yes. Well, it's been 2 weeks, and it's, as you've heard from Maurizio's presentation, there's been a lot of things to unpack, a lot of very big questions, and we've been zooming very far out, also back in time, but trying to kind of anchor ourselves through this sausage-like object that you see here, which is mycelium in cotton, sort of big, long yeah, sausage-like
Tube,
structure
yeah.
tube, yes. And we fill it with mycelium and something which activates it in order to grow. And through working with these very tiny microscopic, we can't see them right now, agents, we learned a little bit about letting go of control, but also about what is native and what is invasive. There's a lot of questions within, how do we navigate this world of like our own interaction and what we do with nature. So here I just thought it was pretty, for me, something that I'm questioning also in my work with working with indigenous animals and landscapes, what belongs here and what doesn't belong here, and how does our own engagement with it change space. And,
so this was worked on over the 2 weeks of the fellowship, but from what Maurizio said and yourself, it sounds like changes will continue to happen, that
exactly.
This project will grow. How will that manifest as the fellowship ends, and where's the end point, or is there one?
Yeah, I guess for me personally, where the space kind of ends is very much in the future. This image that you see here is kind of like a mind map exploded of all the topics we've uncovered. And I think for me, what it has allowed in these 2 weeks is for me to be able to, I think for all of us, to create a space where we can just reflect on big topics. And in that space, not try to solve problems, but to really try to unpack them and look at them and take time to start looking at these questions and really position ourselves within it as designers, because there's lots of contradictions, but there's also lots of space for new ways of thinking, new ways of seeing. It's very exciting. And for me, it's the future is really about working further with these questions and finding ways not to straight away go into problem solving, but to work alongside people who are working in very many different fields, actively observing, trying to make sense of this with our own senses.
I see. So I guess maybe as one final question then, before we moved on to the others, how would you just sort of encapsulate, you were sort of touching on it there, but how would you encapsulate like what has sort of changed in your practice? Is there a different sort of approach from when you came in to now in terms of thinking about problems and solutions sort of in a more specific way, or do you just feel like this is a complete continuation of what you've already been doing?
Definitely there has been, and there will continue to be, a transformation within my own work into allowing things to sort of reveal itself in a way that I don't need to always know right away, but that's of course always been something important for me. But I think the most essential one has been learning from difficult histories and learning not to pretend that they don't exist, but to really state that this is uncomfortable history, but we cannot pretend it's not there, and allowing that to, like, you know, be present, to not overrule the future and take over the future, but to really like help us to deal with the problems of the present. And I think that for me has really been super amazing to experience in this space, to really give time to reflect on that in this, in this building, the site.
Yeah. That's a really beautiful way of putting it. Well, congratulations again. I'm so excited to see where you will go next. But maybe we'll bring in now another fellow, Zeno Franchini.
I will stop sharing.
Oh yeah, thank you. There you are. Hi, so also can you start with kind of where you're from and what kind of work you've been doing even prior than to the fellowship?
Sure. So I'm gonna share the slides we prepared, and
I'm sorry, Zeno, to interrupt. I just want to say one more thing. I just like to remind everyone that we will have some time for questions at the end. So if anyone's been holding back on questions, feel free to add them in the chat. Anyway, sorry, Zeno, please continue.
no problem. So my name is Zeno Franchini. I come from Italy, and I'm part of Marginal Studio together with Francesca Gattello. We are based in Palermo, where we work with what the news calls migrant. We prefer the word newcomers or new Europeans. And we work basically on this incredible flow of knowledge that is entering Europe, that represents for us an alternative to industrial extractive societies. So we try to work on the heritage of these people and try to reconstruct a bit also the local knowledge through that. Of course, in the case of Sicilian craftsmanship, the process of losing a tradition and losing also the possibility to work as a craftsman, it's as real as in many parts of Africa or Southeast Asia, where these people are from. In the picture, you see also Adim and Sharif, which have been our main collaborators in the last project. And since we are somehow very focused on heritage, which somehow means also a lot of problematic heritage situation, we have been super interested in the whole history of this place, and the idea also that an architect, we could call it a colleague, has been shaping the vision for this place, and with all the sort of contradiction that Paul has been bringing in his character, in his persona. And so I think it's quite unique that we have today the possibility to rethink and rediscuss what this space is about. I think it's a duty as designers and architects. And somehow we have been talking a lot about the notion of othering, of how this whole history is characterized by othering of humans and non-humans alike. And how we started in this week to think and act in hopefully a different way. I think it's been quite amazing and very new for me personally. The other element, of course, is that once you put yourself in the position to reinvent tradition, of course, you shouldn't go too far from what the context and the environment around you offer you in terms of materials and in terms of living processes. So this is a picture of mushroom that we found on site. So just to say that what you're going to see soon, also in the presentation of Dan, the more concrete production of this week, it's not an abstract material. It's a material that, of course, is part of the landscape. And as such, it represents a completely different attitude to what it means to produce and to build and to create one more layer of experience for this space. So I really think that design could be a critical instrument for inclusion, and I think there are many interesting suggestions and directions that we are going to be able, hopefully, to also provide to the future fellows and to the dieDAS institution.
Yeah, in comparison to, Pollyanna mentioned, trying to focus less on specific solutions, but more of a sort of collaboration, exploration, research more. How do you feel about that sort of dichotomy towards like addressing very urgent issues that we really need to find solutions for versus the sort of process base that may be so important to actually finding the proper solutions?
Yeah, this has been a very a discussion for these all weeks, because of course we have had input from many lecturers, very abstract, very visionary, but also very pragmatic and very hands-on. And in the meanwhile, we were constructing this structure. None of us ever worked with this material before. So keep in mind that we had to start to grow the structure, to grow the framework on which the structure will be before knowing how the material works. So in a way, we already represent a completely reversed design process. And I think we try to pair the more utopic, visionary dimension of our reasoning, of our view of the world, with very concrete and very pragmatic action that could be taken here and now. So I think that the two things goes hand in hand, in fact, We always need to keep in mind both, otherwise we're just reproducing the same mistake.
Yeah. Well, maybe as a last solution, then I'll ask, what are you going to do next when you go home and reunite with your studio partner? What's next for you?
So actually, I think we are all very curious to know how this structure will grow, because our work, when we're going to leave, actually the mycelium is going to start to take over. So I think we're going to have one part of our thought are always going to be here. Besides that, of course, we will be very busy and active in Sicily with establishing a sort of workspace, a permanent workspace where people can learn and professionalize and be included in the Sicilian society at least. And we have many different upcoming projects that are probably gonna overlap and be a crazy amount of work. So rather not to think about that.
Well, good luck, and also a big congratulations to you. Okay, so the third fellow, let's go with Carolina Pacheco. Sorry, I don't have a good view to see people yet. Oh, there you are. Hi, how are you? Good to see you. Can you tell everyone where you're from and the kind of work that you tend to do so far?
Okay. Hi, how are you? How is everyone? Thank you for all the people who've come to see our work and what we've been doing these days, the kind of questions we've been asking. And it's great to have you because it seems you're having our same interesting in kind of see what's going to happen next with how we remediate our relationship towards nature and through design also. So first of all, I'm going to present myself. My name is Carolina Pacheco. I'm a Colombian-born but Chilean-based designer. Basically, I'm now based in Chile. I work through more different kind of projects towards biomaterials, and most of them are like towards working with the speculative materials or projects, working with developing open source recipes. So I do a lot of workshops. Also, I love a passion I have is to teach. I like to exchange this knowledge in order to create and to perpetuate this new material culture that we are experiencing also in Latin America, which is something that makes me really happy. And then I have another projects that are related more to an artistic design approach, where I try to see how materials can communicate actual realities in terms of politics, education, society, and everything that's going on right now. So yeah, I'm not an expert. I'm learning in the way I do, but just to continue to tell you about what's been my experience also here, what we've been talking about. I think it's been all about involving our senses and involving our ways to see, to go deeper and to look beyond, to create like this biological vision that we all have our struggles also, how do we engage in it? But then it's been amazing with this group of people just to start to think in other scales, start to change our way of understanding things in the form, just in the morphology, which is something our lecturers that have been coming, like Rachel Armstrong, Jonata Gatto, they have been instructing us also a lot in these terms of the politics of the big, the politics of the small. How do we change the way we see in terms of understanding these biogeochemical processes? And then how do we get to communicate with these other species? How do we recognize these patterns within what's there, but we're not able to see right now? So yeah, I've been super interested in and also with everyone here, how do we tell these stories? How do we communicate with non-human agents? And how do we become storytellers of our own living culture? So yeah, that's what we've been talking about these days, and I think it's a topic that I'm really into. To come back to
you have been working with biomaterials already. Can you explain a little bit about the difference of what you've done versus what you've done through the fellowship? Is there a big crossover? Is it a different kind of material and approach?
Yeah, I think, well, in terms of the material itself, it's a big difference because mostly I work with materials that come from the living organisms of the ocean, which you'll know maybe that Chile has a long Pacific coast. So in terms of practical material approach, maybe yes, it's different, but I feel super uncomfortable here in what we've been talking about. I think are the same questions that we also make in Latin America towards this material culture, towards how do we collaborate, how do we get to speak in the same language. So yeah, I think like it's been super nice to get to know these people who are in the kind of different paths, but try to engage in the same vision and reconciliation somehow. But yeah, I'm super excited to go back to Chile and just like try to see how I can incorporate all of this in my own practice also, because working with people, working with living organisms or with the remains of these organisms, which are also as important. How do we relate also? So
yeah. Well, with taking this back home and to your regular practice, how are you on that spectrum between like the process orientation versus, finding specific solutions?
Yeah, so I've been in this field, I think, for 3 years now. It's been a very own-driven approach in the sense of, I've been working with a lot of labs in Chile that they've been always like driven by this curiosity of trying to understand for our own creativity or our own creative approaches. But I think now I'm in this turning point whether to start to understand how can people be more involved in this, not only creatives who need materials or need new agents to collaborate with, but also how do we get to people understand about their waste, about their the objects they use. So yeah, I'm working right now on a lot of things, but one of them is truly try to embrace all of these narratives and stories that are hidden somehow in these non-living agents. I mean, living agents, sorry, non-human agents. And yeah, I think that's how I'm planning to continue with this.
So just to follow up on that and flesh that out more, you are seeing the connection between the importance of storytelling and like broadening who can participate and understand how these sort of intricate systems work.
Yes, of course. I think it's super necessary in order to just see that we're all the same in terms of all these entities and try to understand that language within them and try to get in touch with how we can incorporate it in our daily lives and not only in terms of these areas. So,
do you feel that in the context of the sort of community you're within back at home that's a receptive, like people will be receptive to that message and to hearing these narratives, or do you think it's going to be a really hard challenge?
No, I think, well, it's been a hard challenge. Like I'm super perfectionist and I'm always trying to see how to build these narratives. But then as I also think I've been learning here by Maurizio and everyone, like to just, it takes time to be patient, try to engage also with the people in terms of understanding also their own personal and layers of problems within societies, because I also work with communities in the southernmost city of Chile. So yeah, I think it's a process. I mean, it's not something that's gonna evolve from today to tomorrow, but I'm really sure of my path, and I don't know. I think I will make it eventually, but
oh, we all have to do our part, and see what we can do. Well, thank you for this presentation and congratulations again.
Thank you.
Okay, so our last fellow is Daniel Tisch.
Hi.
Hi, good to see you. Please start off, let us know where you're from and what you've been working on before and during this fellowship.
Absolutely. Thinking about it. Okay, hi, my name is Daniel Fish. I'm a Doctor of Design candidate at the Harvard University Graduate School of Design. My research right now is focused on the sort of intersection between biomaterials and digital technologies. So I work with photosynthetic microorganisms and create carbon negative biomaterials for construction out of them, and then use advanced digital fabrication technologies like 3D printing and advanced robotics to remake the way that we make the built environment. So, and then, just to kind of start on, what our experience here has been, I think one of the really poignant lessons that we've learned from this experience is the importance of regenerative practices in design culture. And this is something that Maurizio touched on earlier. Regeneration suggests how we can start to think metabolically and how our material production, our agricultural systems can set the stage for new life rather than simply harvesting from, or worse, exploiting the landscape. So we've been able to internalize these lessons from field trips to vineyards, like you see here, and nature reserves around Salak, in addition to the guest lectures we've had from practitioners worldwide. And through agricultural methods such as cover cropping, soil regeneration, biodiversity, and fostering symbiotic relationships, such as those used in syntropic farming, which we've spent a lot of time focusing on, we can repair the metabolic rift that has occurred through the over-reliance on fertilizers and pesticides. And these methods help create healthy soil conditions and localize the biochemical flows to help return nutrients to the soil, prevent erosion, and create a productive and protective community of microbes and fungi. But these methods aren't confined to food systems. I think, as designers, we must question the conditions that our biomass materials, such as wood and cotton, the materials that we sort of think as our all-stars in the sustainable future, question the ways that they're produced and whether they further the broken systems of monocropping and petrochemical reliance. And I think this can help us, regenerative solutions can help us transition from reducing harm to providing climate positive solutions.
Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about the work you've been already working on in the lab versus this particular fellowship, and sort of practical versus theoretical? How much crossover would you say there is? Is it very similar or very new?
Yeah, I think it's certainly very new. My experiences with organisms that are essentially are already dead. So just the care it takes to start with a living organism and be able to kind of design the environment around it to essentially seed growth and to think about what it needs to survive, and kind of create this partnership in a really tight way is, I think, something that seems familiar but is heightened when you're living with a material that you're actively growing and cultivating, and is going to be a part of the final structure and really transform it in ways that you can't predict, which is really interesting and relates to this idea of regeneration for sure.
And so how are you going to take this home, and will it change the work that you've already started in Boston, or will you're kind of on a track, and so it will continue in a similar way?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see the ways in which these two tracks can intersect. I think there's a really rich, space there, and a lot of possibilities to think about, both where a lot of biomass can come from, but also the ways that living systems can add more sort of novel behaviors like self-healing or reinforcing, or issues like this, and how they can really be attuned to the environment, such as kind of some of the experiences that we've had here on site. There's honestly, it's been a really exciting process. Materially, we have willows that were harvested from the backyard of a local craftsperson who taught us how to weave the structure. And then the mycelium itself is cultivated on agricultural waste. So we've got a really tight sort of, bio-based system here, but most importantly, the mycelium is, a natural decomposer and will feed on both the agricultural waste and the willow structure. At first it'll make the system stronger. It'll make a stronger cladding material that we've used to kind of coat the outside of the structure, but eventually it'll just lead to the decomposition of the entire installation. As the cellulosic materials in the willow and in the ag waste are broken down, they also supply nutrients to the microenvironment. So they spur new growth from this sort of ephemeral installation that we've been working on. So in a way, it's, this design process is sort of, again, just like creating the conditions to kick off like a very dynamic process.
Yeah.
So this is just one of this is essentially the starting condition, right? This is what the installation looks like in the garden here right now. And of course, the house that we're in from Pulchers and Naumburg behind it. And yeah, I think we're all kind of excited to see the way in which this creature evolves over time, and the ways the mushrooms either take over or how other elements from the environment start to interact with this system as well.
And what would be the most sort of practical, what solution could this offer in a way, if we were looking for specific solutions? Like what would be the most practical way to transform this project into a practical application?
Yeah, I mean, I know Maurizio has a lot to say about that, but as the architect of the group, where I get really excited is thinking about how we can rethink building insulation. Insulation is absolutely critical for the environmental or the energy load that our buildings consume throughout their lifetimes, but the carbon cost, or the energy that it takes to produce that insulation it's the highest carbon. It has the highest embodied carbon of any product in a standard residential home. So really, the kind of sponginess and airiness that you can get from this mycelium when it grows in specific conditions, especially high CO2 environments, it creates this really dense foam that at least I would think would have a really amazing insulation property, and could be a really exciting product in that space.
That's wonderful. Well, it's a really cool structure. I hope we get to see it as it grows over time, maybe through the dieDAS website. But yeah, we'll be watching. But Daniel, thank you so much, and congratulations to you as well.
Thank you.
So this is the end of this, the official program for this first talk of the Walk and Talk. Nobody has provided any questions so far. Just one last call. Does anyone have any? Otherwise, I may just ask Arne and Maurizio just a few final questions. Oh, yes, Maurizio.
I do have a question, actually.
Okay.
So I don't want to take away the stage from you and not act as a moderator, but I would just like to ask the fellows, may they like to do so, if they could perhaps help us understanding how the process of coming together and eventually mediating different perspectives that indeed, as a matter of fact, I know that is something that happened, having been here. How did that process of mediation take place when deciding to work, as we said, driven by intuition without having a pre-established blueprint, and yet needing to quickly formalize also a certain operative plan that though came into being in a very spontaneous way and derived from the different points of view, sensitivities, and because of course now we just had a look at the structure from a very specific angle, which is a beautiful picture that Daniel took earlier today. However, that interesting symbiotic habitat, non-human or human architecture, yet we have to define which type of kind of agents it's going to be able to welcome, and that's just going to happen through a process of observation, is embedding a lot of different symbols, also in its physical manifestation and in the way in which also the different elements composing it, being it vegetal materials on the side and on the other, fungal-based, mycelium-based materials, act within it in a dialogue with one another. So I wouldn't like to direct it to anybody specifically, but I wonder if any of you would like to touch upon the subject.
Maybe each of you could, one after the other, so we can hear from everyone.
Yeah, I can maybe kick off the, the answering. I think, like, I hope it was clear from our presentation that we all come from very different paths. And so design-wise, I think it was has been a constant negotiation, of course, on many levels, like the sort of the group of fellows level, the guidance of Maurizio, the dieDAS fellowship, and then also the whole environment. So, and every decision has been discussed, but of course it was a lot about letting it go. It was a lot about understanding also the try to avoid any imposition, any sort of arbitrary choice, because of course we were starting from a completely different premise. And also the idea of the structure is that since we couldn't know before and we couldn't plan the function, of course, of this installation, it was this sort of continuous habitat that to a certain extent welcomed the human presence, but to a certain extent is almost inaccessible to humans, and maybe force you to take on a different perspective, even just from your very physical position that you need to have within the structure, and then what it forces you to look at, to listen, and to touch. So I would say, from my side, it's been really interesting to also not decide a lot of things. And I have to say, many of the decisions, I was really happy that that was something almost I couldn't foresee, and I would have never probably taken that decision.
Yeah, just to add to Zeno, I think we are all in the same page by saying that I think more than looking for a specific application or function to this creature, I think it's at the end, it's all about the experience we've been having these days towards communicating us, getting to know each other by making, by understanding also the mycelium, the willow weaving, the mistletoe who taught us about how to work with these techniques. So I think at the end, it was all about that, like all about trusting each other also through these non-speaking, non-verbal decisions, because sometimes we just worked and nobody even say anything, but it's just like we knew that each one was taking a good choice. So I think at the end, it was all about that, like also how to embrace a space, how to create a space that could also embrace others and living agents, sorry, non-human agents. So that's why I think we got into like a main decision at the beginning of how maybe the length or how narrow it go, but every time thinking about scale, about thinking how it could welcome someone as big as Arne, sorry Arne, but then how it could also welcome other types of insects and plants and things that we've been encountering these days. So that's was the idea, just like to create this habitat of encounter. Yeah, you can go, Polly or Dan. I don't know who wants to continue.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in really quickly to off of what Kara was saying. I mean, yeah, I think it was a really exciting process, because I think we sketched for all of 30 minutes and then just started jumping out there and building things. And, the sort of center idea was, what Kara was describing, that, it's sort of a continuous space, almost like a loggia, where you might, meet and encounter people in real life, but we're thinking of it as multi-species. So you'll see, the structure is tall at one end and tapers down at the other, so that, humans are somewhere within the continuum. They're not centered anywhere in that structure, but really, yeah, it's a space for multi-species encounter. And I think working at the one-to-one scale and really just being able to, get a feeling for the material, both the willow and the mycelium and the various ways that we've applied it, I think was critical to the process. Just, trying and failing, and failing and failing. But, as we've heard, this week, sometimes you don't fail, and sometimes there's some exciting results that come through the process.
Yeah, I think it was definitely something that I personally had to learn to appreciate, also the fact that sometimes you don't see the outcome straight away, and through these like small samples and tests that we've done, we learned that we can't see the end results, but we can kind of work and make, and through the process of being physical, interacting with space, engage a little bit with letting go. And of course, that's like confusing, conflicting ideas, actively letting go of control. But I think the key was always asking ourselves, like, what does the mushroom want? And how can we also like engage with the elements around us as entities that have a right to also agency within this structure. And I think that's something we're hopeful to also allow to continue to transform, not just in the structure, but in our own practices.
Do you have any final reflections on that, Maurizio, having heard everyone's answers?
Well, I was partly aware, but for me, it's just been incredible to witness the participatory act, the participatory coming together. That was a bit of a natural manifestation. As you know, you can put together a group of talented people and hope that they like each other, but you cannot superimpose the fact that they would behave as a collective. And yet I feel, and please guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel that this type of interaction and mutual trust really was generated through the, again, the challenges that we also, to a certain extent, designed for them through the program. So also this fact of providing a quite tight program with a pre-established framework that seemed quite directed to some objectives, but in reality was meant to be very open-ended and loose, was one of the approaches that we adopted in order to encourage, again, this type of encounter, not only among the fellows, but particularly with all that we are immersed in and not surrounded by. And that has been ultimately the fundamental, I think, point that we had the chance to explode on so many levels through our critical dialogues, critical debates, and eventually the act of physically working with the material, with matter-attents, and trying to understand the complexity that are to be found in any biological process of transformation, but even just in the fact of working with something that mostly often is dealt with in very controlled conditions. And I'm speaking, for instance, about the so-called biofabricated materials, the mycelium-based materials, which are reaching a certain degree of popularity these days, and that do need to comply mostly often to the rules that are imposed by industrial standards, and therefore comply with a certain type of, with the fact of being consistent, of delivering always the very same properties, of being hyper-standardized. And well, what we wanted to experiment with as part of this fellowship was exactly the opposite, the possibility to go beyond this idea of controlling and, once again, let me say, exploiting natural systems in a different way, perhaps in a non-extractive way, but still very exploitative approach, which is what we questioned in the first place, in order to allow for an effective cultural shift that is very much rooted in the recognition of the fundamental role that every single living agent holds towards granting us and all the other agents within the system possibility for thriving for long. So this is actually, indeed, I think, I wouldn't call that it's an objective that we reached, because I think it's very hard when dealing with these processes to think about something being achieved. You know, anything that looks like a point of arrival is nothing else than another starting point, as in this continuous cycle that though doesn't go in a cycle, but has like peaks and rounds and goes backwards and forwards and so on and so forth. And this is what we have the opportunity to appreciate together.
Well, it sounds really wonderful. I hope I get to go there someday and see it in action, because it sounds like quite an experience. Arne, would you like to have some final words? We're coming up on time soon, but we'd love to hear some final thoughts.
I would love to add that from the, first of all, a sincere thank you to Maurizio and Eugenia, who I can't see right now, but who are our head mentor, who's been an extremely relevant and important support in the whole project over the past 2 weeks. Also, just take the quick opportunity to thank the whole dieDAS team, because there have actually been a number of people in the background cooking, cleaning, organizing, making travel arrangements that I think have really done an outstanding job this year to enable the work on site. I'm personally extremely moved by the friendships that have emerged or developed over the last 2 weeks. And I'm always blown away by, you know, how short 2 weeks really are, but how much can actually happen in just a fortnight. And I think the living structure that our dieDAS fellows of 2021 are leaving behind is both exciting, also slightly intimidating. We are a monument of national importance. Also, the gardens are closely monitored by the Heritage and Conservation Department. So I'm keen to see how they will react when they see mushrooms sprouting across the structure and maybe up into the tree as fall comes along with all the rainy weather. But I think it's a truly stimulating and also important document to the repurposing mission that we have set out to accomplish here in Zalek. This is a new time in history, and we are, I think, successfully bringing important questions and quests for answers collectively to the site. And I'm very honored and happy that our vision is step by step turning into reality. One final statement also to the living conditions the fellows have encountered here, because they've actually been living on site in the unrestored buildings for the past 2 weeks, very much looked after during the day, but left alone at night. So it's been the 4 fellows in this sort of really large campus site that is unrestored yet, with trickling water and probably creaking doors. And they've all done a great job. I think also enjoying the atmosphere here. And I'm really, really excited about how well the 2 last weeks have developed. Thank you very much to everyone.
Yeah, I will just add, congratulations and thank you to everyone again, Arne, Maurizio, all the fellows, and to everyone who tuned in. We're kind of at time, but I'd love to just plug the next talks coming up in case you don't know. In about a half hour, our next talk will begin with contemporary architecture curator Beatrice Galli. She's quite a visionary thinker and researcher, and she will be talking about radical architecture, rethinking the global canon. And then tomorrow there are 3 more walk and talk conversations starting at 5 p.m. Central Europe time. Beijing-based architect Zhu Tianqian on the topic of redefining rural coexistence in the countryside. Followed the next hour by Professor Moreau talking about architecture and agriculture elements for a new symbiosis. And the last talk for this season will be with designer Fernando La Paz, and his topic is Saving Seeds, material explorations going global. So I hope everyone will tune in, and thank you again for coming. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you in half an hour.